Welcome back to the Neurostimulation podcast. Today, I'm speaking to Sam Peterson, a former Army bomb technician and combat veteran who survived the battlefield only to face a different kind of war, the battle with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. But out of that darkness came purpose. Sam is the co-founder of Patriot Power Up, an inpatient program that delivers rapid relief for PTSD and TBI. And he also runs Mind Spa Denver, an outpatient clinic that's pioneering cutting-edge therapies from TMS and ketamine to interventions that are based on neuroplasticity. His work really is transforming the mental health care landscape for veterans, first responders, and trauma survivors. So today I'm really excited to talk to Sam about the neurobiology of trauma, why inflammation in particular might be the real villain in mental illness in general, and what it takes to turn pain into purpose through mission-driven entrepreneurship. Sam, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Michael. I'm glad we finally got to do this. We've been doing a little bit back and forth on scheduling, but I'm really happy to be here because this message is really important for everyone's audience to hear.
Definitely. Yeah. And thank you for your patience in terms of the rescheduling and that. But yeah, I'm glad that we're able to get together today. So I'm curious, is a way of introducing yourself. It's just such a fascinating journey. So from your experience in disarming bombs all the way now to rewiring brains, can you walk us through your personal journey and how those experiences led you to found Patriot Power Up?
Yeah. So I've shifted over to take on the CEO role at Mind Spa now. I still have a peripheral relationship with Patriot Power Up, but how I got here was just out of pain. One of the things that they don't tell you when you sign up for the military, regardless of which job you sign up for, is how high the suicide rate is. And it turns out that being a bomb technician has an incredibly high suicide rate, especially during a time of war. And that's mostly because of the constant exposure to traumatic blasts that we're continuously getting hit with. And I suffered quite a bit, but really my contemporaries, all of my peers, had it way worse than I did. And I saw firsthand just how that exposure to traumatic blasts leads to suicide.
Yeah, help us to understand that. On the one hand, obviously, it makes sense in terms of the stress associated with those experiences, but I'm also curious about how just the physical exposure to that sort of energy on a repetitive basis increases the risk for depression, despair, suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, to understand the nature of how TBI causes those downstream consequences, we need to understand the cellular biology of a traumatic brain injury. And one of the main things that happens, so first you have your initial injury to the axon. So imagine your brain, your neurons rather, are made of Legos. So we have this neuron that's made of Legos. It receives an injury of some sort, whether it's a blast or blunt force, and it breaks. Legos scatter all over the floor. Those Legos are tau proteins. Our neurons are actually made of these tau proteins. Normally, the immune system of the brain, your glial cells, sit in a sentinel-like role. They actually shepherd. There's new studies that show that they shepherd quite a bit of neuronal function as well. So these shepherd cells are sitting there doing their job, maintaining the area around your neuron. And when they see all these Legos all over the floor, they go, oh crap, I need to clean this up. This looks like a foreign contaminant. There is cellular detritus in my area. I got to pick these Legos up off the floor. So the first thing that your glial cells do is they enter a state called M1 activation or microglial priming. They put on their little soldier hat, they grab their gun, and they start shooting reactive oxygen species at these Legos to neutralize them. So just like they would do if it was a harmful bacteria. So they shoot these reactive oxygen species, and then they move to a third phase. It's called a phagocytic role. So their job is to go in and clean all these Legos up and absorb them and digest them. That third step takes a lot of energy. If your glial cells don't have enough energy to complete step 3, they get stuck in step 2. So that microglial priming step where they're just firing off at all of this foreign contaminant, if you will, that causes a ton of inflammation. It creates a neurotoxic environment, and that eventually starts to break down and kill your neurons. It causes a number of issues, including what's called tau hyperphosphorylation. So you shoot the Legos with the reactive oxygen species, think hydrogen peroxide. The Lego gets coated in that hydrogen peroxide, and it's floating around in the space between your cells, and it starts sticking to other cells. And that goes on long enough, and you get these big balls of these hyperphosphorylated tau particles. They're called neurofibrillary tangles. And when those tangles get big enough, they start to invade the neurons around them. This mess spreads throughout the rest of the room and throughout the house that is your brain. And over time, those balls, those neurofibrillary tangles get bigger and bigger until they affect the neurons around them and start killing them. And this process goes on and on. It doesn't stop until it kills you. You'll see, if you, one, look at the literature, two, just anecdotally look at someone who has significant either blast or blunt force trauma injuries, and you'll see, imagine someone's functionality starts up here. They have a traumatic brain injury, boom. Immediately their functionality falls. And then after a while, they start to recover. They recover a little bit, and then we just see a plateau. And then that plateau goes on until about 10, 15, 20 years later, boom, falls off a cliff, and they just fall into dementia. And that's why. And that's a process that I don't hear anybody talking about. And that's one of the targets of our therapeutic modalities, is getting to the heart of that issue. We got to clean up those Legos. We got to get that crap out of the intercellular space so it doesn't kill you.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate the way that you use those metaphors to illustrate that process. I've never heard it explained that way, but it makes so much sense. And it's fascinating and worrisome as well, because, exactly the same sort of pathophysiology in the nervous system is part of what causes Alzheimer's disease, right? So as you say, addressing that and correcting that as early as possible is going to be important for all kinds of reasons, not only in terms of current functioning and health, but also to reduce the future risk of neurodegenerative disorders.
Oh, yeah. Even Alzheimer's, dementia, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and Parkinson's are all tauopathies. They all fall into this same family. And if we can address this root cause, and really what we're talking about is a hypoxic issue. The problem is that your glial cells can't make enough energy. They can't make enough energy to clean up the mess. The rate limiting factor here is oxygen. If you don't have enough oxygen, you can't complete the Krebs cycle. And for everybody's watching who doesn't know what that is cellular respiration. That is the process our cells use to convert glucose, oxygen, and a couple other chemicals into ATP. ATP is what our cells run on. If you are not giving your cells enough cellular gasoline, they cannot complete these tasks. And if this goes on long enough, it'll kill you.
Yeah. So do you think it's, as far as the linkage between people becoming frustrated and then developing depression and then despair and then suicidal thinking, I imagine, and perhaps it's partly related to physiological impact as you're describing, but also partly related psychologically to feeling. So if someone's having trouble with concentrating and they're having trouble with functioning, whether it's in their job or their relationships, then they start to get discouraged and frustrated, and they try medications maybe, and that's not working. Is that kind of how the cascade usually goes?
So yes, and we still have this biological process, this knock-on biological process that's going on. If you're looking at the brain and you're just looking at the brain from like a blood vessel perspective, you'll see that our arteries come up, they damn near innervate the amygdala, our fight, flight, or freeze function, our hindbrain, our animalistic brain. But when you look at the prefrontal cortex, when you look at these outer regions of the brain, specifically the ones that are responsible for our higher cognitive functions, you'll see that that the blood vessels are very small. It doesn't take a whole lot of inflammation before all of a sudden red blood cells can't deliver oxygen. So you have a big problem there. Okay, now we can't do cellular respiration because we don't have oxygen. Your cells don't just die, or traumatic brain injury would be almost instantaneously fatal. What happens is if your red blood cells can't get through these vessels, they go, okay, cool, check Raj. We're going to switch over to plan B. And they switch over to a process of energy creation called anaerobic glycolysis. It's a fermentation process revolving around sugars in the brain. And because all your brain has is this glucose, it can't get the oxygen. So switching over to anaerobic glycolysis, it creates a lot of waste products, this fermentation process. So imagine if we're doing cellular respiration over here, this is like burning natural gas. Is there some off-gassing? Yes, but it's nothing that your cellular structure can't start to clean up. That it's pretty limited as far as like creating nastiness versus anaerobic glycolysis. Now we're burning a wood stove. I'm not sure if you've ever been to any of the towns here in Colorado, but just imagine a valley full of houses like in Aspen, Colorado. If all of those houses started burning their wood fire stove, how long would it be before you couldn't breathe in the valley? Perfect example of what's happening in your cells. And that toxicity breeds more inflammation. So you can see very quickly that this process it knocks on itself. And when we're talking about depression or anxiety or PTSD, very broad strokes here, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but if you were to look at the brain, if you were to open up someone's skull and you could see the electrical firing of the brain of someone who had depression, anxiety, or PTSD, what you would very broadly see is an underactive prefrontal cortex and an overactive hindbrain. And that's why.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that it's really interesting that the neuroinflammation piece seems to be totally understandable, unifying principle that's at the root of a lot of this. And I think that goes along with a lot of the recent research that is showing that as a result of other factors like cortisol, excessive amounts of cortisol related to stress and how that promotes the neuroinflammation as well. Yeah, no, thanks again for explaining all that. So I'm curious, so at MindSpa Denver, can you describe some of your philosophy in broad strokes when it comes to treating patients combining these modalities like the repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation and things like ketamine therapy in order to not only address like what we're talking about, things like the neuroinflammation, but also look at promoting neuroplasticity?
Yeah, absolutely. So our thesis at MindSpa is that in order to solve these problems, to get to the root cause, we have to address that inflammatory cascade first. Otherwise, we are pushing a boulder up a hill. Just like you see someone who's struggling with chronic depression that's treatment resistant, same with post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety, we have to fight that inflammation battle before we can ask the brain to rewire. Because if I'm asking the brain to create new connections, one, it again costs a lot of energy to do that, which the brain in those areas doesn't have. And two, we're dealing with an area that's just cramped in by these inflammatory cytokines. There's a non-permissive environment. Imagine it's like trying to grow a plant after you've just sprayed Roundup all over your garden. Not going to work. You got poison everywhere. So our first treatment methodology is let's clear out that inflammation. That's one of the big reasons that we use ketamine infusion therapy as a frontline treatment. So ketamine is a drug that's used every day in pediatric medicine, bariatric medicine, as well as mental health. It is what's called an NMDA receptor antagonist. Basically, it goes into your cells and it goes, hey, there's no glutamate in here. Now, taking a step back, glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter. It's the neurotransmitter that's telling our cells to make energy, to do all of these functions. So ketamine goes up to the receptor on the outside of the cell, knocks on the door and says, hey, there's no glutamate out here, guys. We need some more. Bring it out. Everybody out. Let's go. So your cell expels a large amount of its glutamate into the space outside your cells, the intracellular space. And that's why we see a retraction in consciousness. That's what the K-hole really is your cells going, yeah, guys, like take a lunch break. The cool thing is After that, glutamate takes a lunch break 15 to 45 minutes later, depending on method of administration. When it comes back into the cell, it doesn't go back to doing the same function. One molecule, if it was like, let's just say it was stimulating a mitochondria to make energy, that same molecule doesn't go back to doing that same task. It gets reallocated by the cell. And that is why ketamine is like this control-alt-delete for the brain. That's why it's effective in treating acute suicidality. It also triggers a downregulation in inflammation. Really, it halts your brain from creating certain inflammatory cytokines, so pro-inflammatory markers. It just puts a halt on that. So ketamine is a great way for us to just flip some switches in the brain and give someone immediate relief from those symptoms. And when I say immediate, I'm talking 1 to 2 infusions. So anywhere from 1 to 4 days, and someone can start to feel immediately better. It's a very powerful tool, especially when it's done responsibly. And then we have a couple other treatments, but I've been talking straight.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's awesome. I think it's really important to underscore this issue about fast acting relief, right? Because I think that when I've been in psychiatry for 20 years, and I think it's just so frustrating for patients how long they have to wait to get better on legacy treatments, right? So something like ketamine that can offer that rapid relief is really critical. And it's really emphasizing that. So that's really interesting. And it makes a lot of sense. I think it's given what we were just talking about, the severity of symptoms and the complex pathophysiology of the whole thing, particularly in terms of the neuroinflammation piece, it makes total sense to have to, in a sense, do that intervention right up front to reset the brain in that sense that you're talking about. And from there, I'm curious, so how then might that go? I know it's not really possible to give details, because the other advantage of this kind of an approach, I would imagine, is that it lends itself to highly personalized kinds of treatment protocols, right? So that there'd be that careful assessment phase and then offering various different treatment modalities that are tailored to someone's individual needs. But in general terms, if someone's coming with, say, like a significant emotional issue that's perhaps related to some sort of post-traumatic or TBI related issues, and the ketamine to start, and then would that potentially just lead into a course of RTMS, or what might be the steps?
Yeah. So again, it really depends on it depends on the patient, of course, and what they're coming in for. But just broad strokes, ketamine also, what I forgot to mention is ketamine increases neuroplasticity by upregulating brain-derived neurotropic factor, a very important piece when we're talking about rewiring the brain. The next thing that we typically move on to, and this is, again, broad strokes, this is if someone's doing our whole protocol, we do offer these a la carte, but if in a perfect world, someone starts on ketamine, after that first week, then we have an approval for transcranial magnetic stimulation, and we also start them on hyperbaric oxygen therapy simultaneously. Yeah, I'm sure this is the Neurostimulation podcast. I'm sure you guys talk about TMS all the time. But just
for sure.
Yeah, just for anybody that's not watching, I'll throw out the quick explainer for the layman's terms. Basically, TMS, for anybody who's never heard of it, is MRI technology. We take an MRI coil. That MRI coil creates a magnetic field that we place that MRI coil on the surface of the scalp in a specific spot for treating major depressive disorder. It's the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. That magnet creates that magnetic field under the surface of the scalp. And that magnetic field, very high level, tricks your neurons into clustering more densely in a network. So, how we do TMS, we also take it to the next level. Our TMS techs really work to help our patients stimulate that area, or rather activate that area while they're stimulating it. So we do a lot of DBT workbooks, sometimes playing puzzles or playing like brain games with our patients while their brain is getting stimulated. And that has shown to be much more efficacious long-term for our patients. And then through this whole process, like, we are trying to rewire the brain. We're trying to get your brain cells to do different things. Anytime you're asking a cell to branch out and create new connections, you're asking it to spend a lot of energy. So we talked about the TBI and that neuroinflammatory process. That's where the HBOT comes in. That's where hyperbaric oxygen therapy can turn this entire thing up to 100, because we have a rate limiting factor in our physiology that keeps our brain from getting more oxygen. It's our lungs. We can only breathe so much unless you're doing holotropic breath work every single day. There's no way to get your cells the energy they need to do all this work in the most effective way possible. So that's where the hyperbaric oxygen therapy comes in. And for anybody that's not familiar with hyperbaric, it's a wonderful treatment that here in the States is FDA approved for 15 different conditions. A lot of them are around wound healing, like diabetic wound ulcers, non-sealing wounds, radiation poisoning. It's also FDA approved for treating the bends. There's a whole list. Currently, traumatic brain injury and PTSD are not part of that list, but there's a ton of peer-reviewed research and meta-analyses that show that this is effective in treating these disorders for the reasons I'm about to explain. Big picture here. So you get inside a chamber, the chamber is closed off, and we increase the pressure inside the chamber by pumping air in there. We typically treat, depending on the disorder, anywhere from 1.3 atmospheres to 2 atmospheres. That's the sweet spot. For TBI, 1.5 is where the most research has been done. To give you an example that'll make a little more sense, if you're diving, you're getting about 2 atmospheres absolute of pressure when you're at about 33 feet under the water. So you're down at this pressure, you're in this chamber, and then you're breathing in concentrated oxygen. That forces oxygen into your blood plasma. So now, talked earlier about those red blood cells and how we're running into these inflammatory issues that are keeping our red blood cells from getting to where they need to deliver oxygen. Now we've just taken those guys out of the picture. We don't need them anymore. We have now created a pipeline directly to the cells to bathe your brain in oxygen. Now, all of a sudden, your cells are supercharged. They are super excited. We have put nitroglycerin in those gas tanks, and they start producing a lot more. In fact, doing 20 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen therapy has been shown to increase stem cell production by up to 8-fold. So brand new cells, whole body. We're also down regulating inflammation. And when you use these things in concert, the results that we've seen are dramatic and profound. To give you an example, at Patriot Power Up, we were using all of these modalities together in an inpatient program, along with culturally competent talk therapy for veterans. What we saw in that program was astounding. Within 14 to 17 days, full symptom remission. We're talking guys are coming in. This is an inpatient program, so they're not coming in because they're having a good day. So these guys started at a PHQ-9 of 20 plus. That's pretty damn high on the depression scale. GAD-7 in the same zone, and as well as a very high PCL-5, which is a measure for post-traumatic stress disorder. Within 14 to 17 days, they had achieved symptom remission. They no longer qualified for the diagnosis. And if you look at the thresholds, they were under the mild threshold. Within 21 days, over 90% of the patients we treated were at zeros across the board. Yeah. And the awesome thing is they got better and they stayed better. And we looked at their executive function before and after. So we used CNS vital signs, pretty much the gold standard for anyone's watching who's a veteran. If you've ever taken the Army ANAM exam, which is a neuropsych battery. So we did that again, pre and post. What we saw was pretty astounding. With our PTSD patients, the average increase in executive function after 45 days of treatment was 40%. 40% increase in executive function. That's pretty damn awesome. For our TBI patients, like this is where things get a little astounding. 125% was the average increase in executive function. And again, symptoms gone. So these numbers are incredible. They're super exciting. There's a ton more data that we have to collect, but like we're knocking on the door of getting to the root cause here, and people are starting to take note.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to emphasize also. And I think part of why it's important is that, as you say, what you're offering now on the outpatient side is grounded in that experience in people who were ill and dysfunctional to the point where they needed to be hospitalized. And it's just incredible. Just those results are fantastic. So congratulations to you and your team. I think that's great that you're now able to expand the offering out into folks that are in the community and that are similarly suffering and looking for help. That's fantastic.
Yeah, we've been able to really take this to the next level. So we've started a program called our TRICARE Preferred Program. So if you're not familiar with TRICARE, that is the insurance that active duty personnel in the U.S., Reserve, National Guard, and military retirees and their families have. So if someone qualifies for transcranial magnetic stimulation through TRICARE, which is 3 failed antidepressant medications of sufficient dose and duration, they qualify for our program. So our program is you qualify for TMS, and once you qualify for TMS, they'll typically approve between 30 to 60 TMS treatments. And when they do, we give the patient that many sessions of hyperbaric oxygen therapy for free, as well as 6 sessions of ketamine for free. And since it's outpatient and not inpatient, we're able to bill for the talk therapy. So we can put all of this protocol into a single outpatient experience for our patients. And I'm beyond excited about rolling this out. We're starting here in Colorado, and we're very rapidly looking to expand to the rest of the nation so that we can just make veteran suicide go away. Because that's why these people are killing themselves. They don't have any hope, and 2, their brains are inflamed. If we can fix that and rewire the brain, we can end this. It's not that hard. And honestly, it's not that expensive either.
Yeah, no, I think it's just such a great vision. And it's just so encouraging, and it's just so great to hear the message. I'm sure that Veterans Affairs is interested as well, right? In terms of, as you say, just doing as much as they can to, maybe not. Say, what are your thoughts here?
Under the new administration, things are going to change. Under the Biden administration, it was like beating your head against a brick wall that has spikes in it. The VA is all, at least the last administration, the VA was about the VA. They were trying to federalize everything. They refused to give what's called a community care consult. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is the VA and the DOD, the Department of Defense, do not like hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It's not part of the formulary. And I got in a pretty knockdown, drag out argument with a psychiatrist from Vail about this. It's not in the formulary. And I was like, do you know why you think that this is a bad idea? And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, do you know why you have this opinion that you're spouting right now? He's like, doesn't work. And I was like, okay, let me tell you why you think this. There were 3 studies that were done by the Department of Defense, one by the Army, one by the Navy, and one by the Air Force. These were sham-controlled studies. In a sham control study, you have a treatment group and a group that thinks that they're getting it. It's like a placebo. For things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, it's a little difficult to make someone think they're going to pressure. So what they did with the sham group is they took them down in the chamber with room air, so no concentrated oxygen. They brought the individuals in this study down to 1.3 atmospheres absolute. So they brought them down to a therapeutic depth. And then they kept them there for an hour for 40 treatments in each one of these studies. They gave them a therapeutic dose of the therapy. And then the treatment group went down to 1.5 atmospheres absolute and breathed in concentrated oxygen. Both groups got better. Right. And they called it the placebo effect. And they only used one method of patient-reported symptomology to justify calling it the placebo effect. And I talked to the PhD who wrote this, and I was like, can you please hand me your doctorate so I can just tear it up in front of your face? Because this is called Henry's law of fucking chemistry. A gas will diffuse into a liquid at a given rate, and an increase in partial pressure will increase the amount of gas that diffuses in that liquid. That's exactly what happened with these people. You put them in you gave them a therapeutic dose. You downregulated inflammation in their brain, which is the primary issue that they have with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and TBI. So you relieved their symptoms through this therapy, and then you called it the placebo effect? Guys, I have a master's in business, and I know this. Like people who are neuroscientists about this shit.
Sure.
Sorry, you're really passionate.
No, yeah, I think it's good that we've actually touched on this because I think honestly, particularly where I'm at in functioning in the Canadian health system, which sounds like has similar issues to what you encountered with previous iterations of VA and whatnot. I think the importance is that people have options, right? And so if they find that they've been stuck in a sort of bureaucratic mess associated with more sort of top heavy healthcare bureaucracies and not getting anywhere, I think it's super important that folks like yourself are offering people innovative options that are also evidence-based. But as you say, honestly, a lot of the psychiatric industry is captured. They talk about the pharmacoeconomic industrial complex, whatever they call it, and how there's capture of the schools, training programs, the journals, the research funding. And so, yeah, absolutely. To have an option like what you're offering there at MindSpa it's really encouraging, I think, because as you say, you're getting the results and you're looking to expand. People are getting better, which is the most important thing. So, yeah, I think it's just fantastic to offer people these options and help them to get better as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Michael, how have you experienced that? Because, like, how have you experienced dealing with the Canadian health system? Because here it is just so owned by the pharmaceutical industry. It's wild.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's hard. On the one hand, there are some people that benefit from medications. There's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, it's hard for people to explore different options. They've had disappointing results with medications and or psychotherapy. I think it's increasingly there are some more options available like RTMS, but then that's still in many provinces not covered by the provincial
Oh, really?
insurance system. Again, it's sad because it's often the people who need the help the most that can afford it or they can't advocate for themselves enough to know where to look for other options. And so definitely it's frustrating, but increasingly like with different clinical neurostimulation programs and people who, I think even just media like this, people who can just watch and listen to shows like this for free and just increase their education and awareness about different treatment options. I think that's a big part of it because up until recently, people have been limited by going to see their doctor and not knowing where else to go for help or for different options if they need a second or a third opinion. They're not getting better and just trusting the system as it exists, which often doesn't serve people very well in the end.
Yeah, that's a good point. It also brings up another one. I'm sure you've seen this as well. Just on TMS and on our TMS specifically, the fact that we have to administer this treatment over 6 weeks is criminal. A normal course of TMS, as I'm sure your audience knows, is about 36 treatments. We get it done in about 7 weeks. The only reason that it takes that long is because the insurance companies won't let me bill for more than one treatment at a day. The studies out of Stanford with the Saint protocol and Magnus Medical are incredible. They're doing a whole course of TMS, up to 50 treatments in a week. And their data is showing that 90% of people respond to that. That's insane. Why? There's there's a zeitgeist in medicine that I don't think people understand. And it's something that I keep having to bring up. But, there's two really primary things in medicine that doctors are supposed to abide by. First one, Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And the second is least invasive to most invasive. You want to do the thing that is going to create the least amount of potential biological harm or impact before moving on to the next. How in the hell are we saying as an industry that a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that is changing your neurochemistry and takes 10 weeks to work and then takes a much longer tail to wean off of, or you will have withdrawal symptoms that make you want to kill yourself? How is that less invasive than using a magnet to stimulate your neurons in an outpatient procedure that you can walk away from that has very limited side effects and an incredibly low risk profile? How does that even make sense?
Yeah. No, you're right. 100%. Again, there's a variety of different factors, but what I find refreshing is, and I've chatted with a friend of mine in Texas, who's an entrepreneur as well. And part of when I vent to him, when we talk sometimes, and I say, honestly, that it's not just a Canadian thing, but I think for clinicians in general. And there's good reason for it. Obviously, safety is very important, but I think what's not encouraged so much is the innovation piece, right? And so
Oh,
for
yeah.
someone who's more business minded, it's understandable that there's a frustration. And as you're expressing, it's almost like being mystified about what's the problem, right? We've got these treatments that are showing incredible results and the science is there, the evidence is there. So why is it not accessible to everybody right now? So having the frustration around the regulatory limitations and this sort of overly cautious approach is certainly frustrating. But again, kudos to you all and your team for, really just pushing the frontier and making these effective treatments available for people and also individualizing it, as I was saying before, like looking at how can we best combine the treatments that target these processes in a way that gets people relief as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that, Michael. I appreciate it. I was kind of shorthanded, get patients better faster, keep them better longer. And if that's not your goal, you're in the wrong industry.
Yeah, 100% for sure. No, I think that's a good point to wrap up on for sure. Maybe before we do, what would you mention? So you've got visions to expand. What's next for Mind Spa Denver, just in the near term and the future? Are you looking to broaden different clinics within Colorado and or outside of the state, or what are you guys planning?
Yeah, we're actually currently seeking some investment to expand down to Colorado Springs. So that's the other city down the Front Range. Once we do that, I would love to see our programming become integrated with the VA and the DoD. On the Department of Defense side, helping the DoD retain the warfighter is such a huge issue. Retention has never been lower. Recruitment has never been lower. It is so important that we retain these men and women, just like myself. Like, I was a $10 million guy. When I left the Army, it took $10 million in 6 years to replace someone with my skill set. We can't afford to be losing these people in droves. We just can't. Our nation's national security really depends on us having a fighting force that's ready to go. And furthermore, the DoD, when someone gets injured, should not just be kicking the can down the road to the VA. We have created kind of our own welfare state within the veteran community with people who are getting very reasonably hurt, both mentally and physically, in the military, and they're getting the can kicked down the road to the VA and just say, hey, here's 50 grand a year for the rest of your life. Just suffer quietly, please. There's so many ways that we can make this system better. And, that's my goal with all of this, is to expand the reach of these programs, and not just to veterans and active duty, but to first responders as well. The two primary reasons for disability within the first responder community are orthopedic injuries followed directly by PTSD. We can treat these things. We have the technology. We talked about hyperbaric oxygen therapy and that increase in stem cells. The cool thing is we can take those stem cells out of your blood, concentrate them just like you would PRP in the hospital, and we can take this super PRP and stick it wherever we want. And it's your own cells. There's so much left to do. We're just at the beginning of this. And my goal is for this to be national, and not just for my business, but my goal is to change the way that mental and physical health are treated in this country, because we can do so much better.
Yeah, for sure. Amen to that. 100%. No, I think it's fantastic. It's really inspiring. I really appreciate your passion and your vision. And I would really encourage viewers and listeners to check out the links in the show notes. I'll put links to Sam's clinic and all of his projects in the show notes. I really appreciate your time, Sam. And I encourage folks to check out that information, the content that I'll put in the show notes. So Sam, thanks again. Really appreciate your courage, both in terms of your service and in the way you've chosen to turn the challenges and the pain into healing for others in this really inspiring way. Yeah, these particularly, again, the rapid acting nature of these interventions that I really think are looking to transform the mental health landscape for, again, as you say, not only those who serve or have been injured in service, first responders, and the general public who are looking for alternative, but still effective, personalized treatment options. Yeah, and also for viewers and listeners, if you're listening and you're struggling with these kinds of things, certainly don't hesitate to check out the options that are available at Mind Spa Denver, or if you know someone, please refer them or share this episode. Just help to inform people and educate people. So Again, Sam, thank you so much for your time. And I just wish you all the best with your work and all your projects and your vision.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. It was great to come on the podcast and have this conversation with you.
Okay. All the best. Take care.